Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn and our usual Dissident Dispatch slot. Tonight's show is going to be a little bit different. Instead of a dispatch, I have an interview. And it is with someone who is going to talk to us about a topic in education, very specifically. So it'll be a little mixture, not exactly a dispatch, but it's going to be pretty dissonant. We're talking about school choice today. So I hope if that's of interest to you, you will go grab other people and bring them to the show, like, share, do all the things. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing to be notified when I make new content relating to our education woes here in America. Tonight, I have with me Mike Ross. Mike Ross is the Libertarian candidate for governor in the state where I live, North Carolina. He has lived in the Charlotte area for more than 2 decades with his wife of 18 years and their son. He obtained degrees in business and finance before becoming a certified financial planner. After getting his start in tech, he began working in the corporate sector in the early 2000s until he left to start My Money Coach in 2018 to help provide quality financial advice to people of all economic backgrounds. Using the golden rule as his guide, he works hard to provide for his family and help others in need. His modesty and selfless attitude have led him to become active in his community, nonprofit groups, and movements like the Sunshine Project when he is not running his business, homeschooling his son, or working with various groups that serve those in need. He and his family enjoy spending time and attending church, going to the gun range, and having family nights at their Gaston County home. And I know I'm not usually a political commentator, and so I'm really not changing things in that regard by having Mike here. I am very sympathetic, as you all know, to libertarian politics, and I've spoken at various, events, libertarian events, because I don't really align well with either of the other two parties. But I've asked Mike here because he is a homeschooler, so he has the perspective of making a choice, that stupid thing, making a school choice for himself, even in the absence of ESAs or vouchers or whatever. He is choosing to homeschool his son. And because as a candidate for public office, he's had to formulate a policy about education and has some ideas on school choice that are different from what you typically hear. Those of you who follow my channel know that I am opposed to the voucher / ESA version of school choice proposed by most Republicans, including here in my home state. And so I've asked Mike to come and talk about what he has in mind as a libertarian candidate, because I think it might be yet another alternative we have yet to discuss. And I want to talk about my thoughts on school choice in general, because he has some interesting views on that as well. So without further yammering from me, please join me in welcoming Mike Ross to our studio. Hello.
Hey, Deb. Thanks so much for having me on. And I know that they call you an extremist homeschooler, or at least you call yourself. I
Yes.
think I would also fall into that category. They'll probably paint me as an extremist as well for
Our
wanting
own
our
governor.
education system to actually be a good education system. So.
It's our governor. Our governor, Cooper, said that we were extremists. And I believe Josh Stein said the same thing, that we extremist homeschoolers are, trying to do bad things by getting the government out of education.
Yeah. We, the parents who care about our kids and care about their education are the extremists, not the central planning that's leading to, massive failures across the state and across the country. We're the extremists.
Exactly. So speaking of that, let's just talk about education in general and government's involvement in it. Do you agree with me that it's working just fine if the goal was to have, state compelled education? And people say it's broken. I'm like, no, actually it seems to be working exactly as designed, in the sense that we parents don't choose what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's working as designed if you have objectives and goals that are different from what I think most Americans and most parents care for,
Yeah.
right? For
Yeah.
me, I care about relatively few things. I want education, whether it's me giving it to my son, or if I do choose to send him to a magnet school or something like that in the future. I want it to teach you how to think, not what to think, but how to think critically, how to reason, and how to teach you some kind of skills, right? Prepare you for adulthood to go out there and be a contributing member of society and find independence and innovate. And from that metric, I look at the data and I think that the system is failing and or failed. But if you're looking at creating people who think the way that you want them to think, which sure does make it easy for the government, I think that the public school system is quite effective for that goal. Sadly, it's failing in the places that I think any parent who cares about the education of their child, it's failing there.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I would even go so far as to say it's also creating a lot of the problems it claims to solve, whether it's mental health woes, anxiety, all these kinds of things like inability to function in a social environment, all the issues that they claim to want to help, they seem to be causing or exacerbating.
Yeah.
Now, enter the in the political realm when we talk about education. What I notice is most people, most Americans, regardless of political party, seem to take, with the exception of libertarians, so the two major parties, tend to take for granted that there must be a system. That, because we've had this fallacy of it's always been there, therefore it must exist. We've had public school for the better part of 100 and not quite 50 years. I mean, 120 some odd years, let's say.
Right.
And it's got to stay. Like the idea that doesn't need to remain the status quo is anathema. Most people were like, well, then what are we going to do? And so the first thing that I usually bump into when I talk about getting government out of education is this reaction from most people that says like, well, and then what? Like, we're going to be left adrift in the middle of the Pacific Ocean of whatever. And how do we, or how do you in particular address that concern? Like when somebody says to you, well, what will we do without the government running education? What would be your first thing you would say?
This is something I thought a lot about, Deb, in formulating my official platform as a candidate, as a libertarian candidate. And I think the ultimate libertarian answer is the government should have no part in any of this, right?
Yes, exactly.
But in North Carolina, we're at least bound by our state constitution, right? So
right.
I really view the government's role that we should seek to minimize it as much as humanly possible. So when I put forward an education plan, I thought through how do I create something that hits all of the marketing points of how the GOP is selling school choice? Because on its face, right, the idea of, hey, you've got a poor community that has a crap public school, and that's the only option that local parents have to send their child to. And you're saying, hey, we're going to give them an alternative to go get something else. And that is a pretty compelling argument, because I don't think that there's anybody out there who's really looking and saying, no, we don't want poor kids to get a good education.
Right.
But the more government involvement is there, one, the more that they can tilt towards their objectives as opposed to those objectives that I think matter, right? Teach them how to think and teach them useful skills. The best way to get that out of it is to get the government to do as minimal fulfillment. So my plan really takes that and says, okay, since the North Carolina government has to provide for the education, I want them nothing more than at most, at least until we repeal, change our constitution, I want them to do nothing more than funnel the money out. I want all of the education decisions, whether it's the curriculum, the scheduling, the class size, all of that should be decided at the most local individual level, whether it's a teacher that wants to start a micro school for 10 kids in their community and run it out of their house, whether it's a teacher who just wants to do a specific class and offer that as a slot, because that's something I do as a homeschooler, right? We do the core four, and then I like to find out, well, what interests my kid? He's really into like coding, so we send him to a local coding club, right, every week. And it's just a class that we add on. Where essentially, I've heard some Republicans that are realizing that a lot of this legislation that they're doing is just going to lead to the ideological and essentially overall control of private education by the government. I want to dismantle that monopoly. So one of the biggest critiques that I get from even some libertarians is, Mike, your plan is socialism. All right. They look at my plan and they say, okay, so because my plan really boils down to take the total amount we spend on students, divide it to get a per student amount. That's how much those kids can have for education. Whether that parent chooses to, buy a curriculum online to do that and then send them to a bunch of extracurriculars, whether they choose a local micro school that has 5 other students, whether they choose an existing public school because they like their existing public school, or any other system that may not even be invented yet, have that money follow the parents. So in that sense, it is socialism. If you want to do away with it, I guess we have to change our constitution. But in the meantime, it's at least less centrally planned socialism, right? It's putting it in the hands of the parents who are the ultimate deciders in that equation. And I think that you'll ultimately get better results, right? Where you bring that down, you look at some of the big challenges. One, obviously, we have all the educational outcomes that are bad, not only for the individual child, but for their communities and the school to prison pipeline and all of these things. But teachers really get the shaft. I've talked to, since becoming a candidate, I've talked to a lot of teachers who have left the profession because of the red tape, the regulations, all of these things that prevent them
the lack
from
of
being
discipline.
good teachers, right? Like
the inability to discipline your class.
There's so many of those things. And
yeah,
the other way going, teacher pay, right? Like really think about that. We spend about $13,000 per student. Most teachers I talk to would dream of only having a class of 10 students, right?
Right.
Only 10 students in this class. Well, if most of the money was going to the actual value provider in this service relationship, with this public good, the teachers should be the ones getting most of the money. But our teachers are very underpaid compared to that, where, with my plan, a teacher could go start a micro school, right? We currently pay $13,000 per student. You got 10 students, you run it like a small business. You run it out of your house. You could rent space if you want. A couple of teachers could get together and start a co-op and rent. I don't care. Let the market do that. The government should do nothing more than be that facilitator of money to meet that constitutional demand. But ultimately, let the free market work, because the current system's not working. That's one thing as a homeschooler, I'm worried about potentially sending my kid to a magnet school, but I can't replicate $1 million science lab. And he's into engineering and science. So I'm dealing with that as like a dad and a homeschool parent of like, how do I send him? Because this is like, I think the #2 school in the state for that particular program. So I'd love to see it where you give that power to the parents where they have real school choice, right? Because right now, this all school choice as long as it's one of the things that we approve.
In other words, for the audience watching, just to be clear, because I think sometimes we take for granted how much we already understand background.
Yeah.
Okay. Most people, whether it's North Carolina or any other state, your state decides what is a school. Okay. So that's, your state decides even if they put in place like ESAs, vouchers, whatever, they decide who gets them, how much they get, what percentage still goes to the public school. In other words, in every bill I've ever seen, it's not the full amount. Like what Mike's talking about is if we took all the money currently collected, like the status quo ante here of like, this is what we're currently collecting in taxes from all sources into the pot called education at the state level. Now, the county has money too, right? And we're going to just literally turn it around from the treasury and send it back out on a per head basis equally. You're a child school age and we would otherwise send this to the public school. We're just sending it to mom and dad. Now, and we're not going to decide what a school is. We're not going to tell you where to spend it. We're not going to do any of that. And you can still turn around and hand it over to your public school if you want, to the one that's still there in your neighborhood, but they're going to have to now like woo you. Like they're going to have to, come and spend it with our school. They can still exist. The only thing is, Mike, you're going to have to address the fact that if they don't know going in, they can't plan for a certain amount they're guaranteed to get. They don't know how to hire their staff. They can't take care of buildings and grounds. They can't, so in other words, just like any other business, if they can't predict their income, they can't, they can't like plan and have the right amount of teachers. It could be overrun or they could have, too many teachers. So that could end up being a problem. But that just so people understand that school choice as conceived of by Republicans is something very, very different, where you're going to take your Department of Education, you're going to create a new little bureaucracy called it's probably going to be a department within the department that handles the non-public education. And those people are going to be in charge of taking applications, sending out, making sure that money gets sent out, making sure that people are audited, that they spent it the right way, making sure the schools are compliant with whatever regulations they have in place, that their definition of school is whatever. Da, 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 da. So it's really just making the bureaucracy of the government's education apparatus at the state level bigger. Now, they'll send you your little card, or they'll send the voucher thing to the school, or however they're going to arrange it, depending on the state. But they're as Mike points out, the fulfillment. They do the fulfillment. So you make a choice within a range of approved choices. It's not like, we're going to world school. We're going to take the 13 grand, our 2 kids is 26,000, and we're going to take our own earnings, whatever. And we're going to go work from this place and this place and this place. And we're going to world school with our North Carolina money. Now, of course, right away, when I say that, you can probably go, there are going to be North Carolina voters who are not going to be too happy that their North Carolina tax dollars could be used any old which way, even to world school, or even to go spend it on some program that's out of a different state or whatever, and feed their economy instead, because it was collected not just from the individuals, right, Mike? It was collected from corporations. In fact, the lion's share of it is collected not from your county taxes and your real estate taxes, but from corporate taxes and sales taxes and things like that, which are not, they're paid for by individuals, but not to the tune of 13 grand per kid. It's a rare person. You're in the tippy top of 0.01% of earners if you're paying 13 grand per kid in your taxes. So how do you square that? I mean, in other words, on the surface, your plan sounds certainly better in that we don't grow the bureaucracy. We don't say we're going to hire a bunch of new people at the Department of Ed, and we're going to come up with new definitions of what a homeschool is and what a this is and what a that is, so that we can dole out money into the private sector and get our fingers in their pie. Okay, that's an improvement. But now you have probably even more demands for oversight. How would you deal with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea of that's something that you always have, right? Is throughout any government program, anytime the government is giving out money, whether it's private welfare, corporate welfare, school vouchers, there is always going to be a fraud cost. That's the reality. If you have any sort of socialist system that is distributing dollars in any system, you're going to have some degree of fraud. And the government's typical status quo counter to that is, all of the oversight. When I look at, and not to veer too much off of education, but it's prevalent in education and everything else, I think a lot in healthcare too. When you add all of this administrative cost, it's really hard to say, hey, now we've essentially got 2 things that are economically sucking the life out of the effectiveness of these taxpayer dollars. Because the fraud, even with all of this oversight, it still happens. But now you have this billions and billions of dollars here. So I think at the state level, and this is one of the things, there's varying degrees of libertarians and how radical they are versus how moderate they are. But at the end of the day, I believe that the more local those decisions are made, right, with the ultimate one being the household, right, as far as how ours is going to be distributed, I would like to see something there, right? If there's a problem school in a particular community that is harming kids or is sucking in tax dollars and not even providing an education, I think that community has a much better opportunity to hold that school accountable, run those bad actors out of town, whatever that may be. But ultimately, if you give that control and power to the parents, at a bare minimum, I think you're forcing competition, and you're at least making sure that you get rid of all of those spent administrative costs that go in there, and you can at least create an alignment, because there may not be any other choices, right? The public school may be the only choice that exists, especially in some rural areas. But when you put it out there and say, hey, these dollars are up for competition, if you can provide better outcomes and you can go into the community and you're able to do this, whether you do it as one teacher who's going to get a few kids, or if a bunch of teachers want to form together and create a co-op, right? We got to do something different. And the idea of creating this situation where what'll happen is you'll have this kind of situation where you've got vouchers, right? So you're bringing in kids who maybe couldn't afford to go to that private school, but you still have some of the kids that are fully paying for it in some cases, or paying more, or whatever that may look like. But what happens with all of this legislation I'm seeing in all of these other states, and what, I'm sure the GOP would do here in North Carolina with school choice, is you're going to have this situation where if the schools want the money, they're going to have to play ball with whatever arbitrary requirements, whether it's curriculum, whether it's cultural issues, whatever they may be. You become beholden to them because now they've got you addicted to that government money. And then it becomes a situation where you potentially say, okay, well, what if the government's teaching something in the public schools that I don't agree with, whether it's values, whatever it may be. You go to a private school. Well, now there's no escaping that. And a lot of times people forget where, because you mentioned that your audience is across the country, right? So someone, we're a purple state, right? But someone who's maybe in a red state, oh, this will be great. You always have to think, what will this legislation do if the politicians who you least agree with had this power?
I say that all the time. And people still give me this, but it's better than nothing, or you're making the perfect the enemy of the good. And the problem is that, everything you say is true, but we still have the federal government to deal with. And I see that Lynn Taylor is in the comments, and she says, let me get to her comment, because she's right. And she says, hopefully the libertarians will listen to the truth. To dispel the U.S. Department of Ed, you must repeal every federal law connected first. Without that, ed will just be scattered. So your plan, if you distributed the money, even if you sequestered somehow the federal funds separately, the federal government is already, federal courts have already ruled that that's not good enough. That the money, the second the state accepts the federal money, it's fungible, and you have your $13,000 per kid in part because your education costs are defrayed by them. That no matter where the kid ends up in school, the state is benefiting from the federal funds, even on behalf of those students, especially if they're special needs or anything like that. And so therefore, they either threaten to take the money, like not give it to you, or tell you you can't do what you're doing, or you're running afoul of their laws. And so obviously you can't do anything about that right here in North Carolina. The only thing that you might be able to do is literally convince the North Carolina General Assembly that, with your math skills and your financial planning skills, that no, we can do without their money. We can tell them to take their money and stuff it, because as I understand it, they can withhold it, where we can also say we don't want it. As far as I understand, that we can nullify.
Correct.
So it seems to me that would be a prerequisite for your plan to work, especially because I think the reason that the GOP plans are okay with the federal government is there's wink, wink, nod, nod behind the scenes. Don't worry. You guys can still do your title legislation in these private schools. We're not going to stand in the way, right? But the libertarian approach would be to not want that, to not want them to come in and say, wait a minute, you can't just let the parents take it wherever they want. Then we can't get our federal government, So would you be willing to do that, to investigate saying, too bad, so sad, we don't want your money?
Absolutely. I mean, if I was running for president, right, and there's a lot of libertarians running for president, and I don't know if they're unanimous, but the vast majority of them would all say that we need to abolish the U.S. Department of Education, right? That's something that I think the vast majority of libertarians are 100% on board. Obviously, the race I'm running for, governor, I can't do that.
You can't do that. Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head, right? Nullification. That's something I'm a big believer, and maybe it's because I'm one of those radical libertarians. But when I look at all of the decay that we're seeing within our institutions and society at large, and this growing bloat of a federal government, I think the answer lies in two historical documents that I think the powers that be would love it if we just forgot existed as Americans. And that's, the Declaration of Independence and the 10th Amendment, right? Who has really, really tested the bounds of the 10th Amendment when it comes to nullifying federal law that is wildly dispopular with the population of the state? And, I'm a financial planner. I look at numbers and statistics all day for a living, right? So I'm going into this race as a third party, knowing what the reality is, but I'm still choosing to do it anyway. Because the reality is, if we don't start talking about these issues and realizing that localizing and localizing our politics, right? Pushing that power from the federal government to the state government, and maybe I'm a little more radical. I would say push it down even further to the municipalities and the subdivisions of the municipalities.
Right.
If you get to a point where I think the numbers around like 7,500 of the almost 13,000 comes from state dollars.
It
right?
does.
And I just look at that. Or even if it was state dollars, right? Just the state dollars where you said no to everything else. And the reality is you'd still have state, you'd still have county, right? It's just that federal portion that we would also have to say kick rocks to. Maybe it goes from having a micro school with 10 students to 15 students. Right. But the math can still work. What I know is, I was at an event with you, Deb, where you did a presentation at the LP MEC.
Yep.
And you went through the statistics where they said, here's where we are now.
Right.
And here's our goals, right? Where you think of goals, you're like, okay, how can we get this meaningful? And it was something like the current status quo was like 5% of students were actually at a proficient level. And the goal was to get to 25. To me,
I know.
You're viewing success at getting to a 75% failure rate. And if they get it, I bet they'll pat themselves on the back and ask for a bunch more money for their administrators and these consultants that came up with this plan. It's
in the same breath, they will tell you, we deserve more money because we can't help the kids' success without more money. But look at our amazing success that we did, and we should get more money because of the amazing success. And in the same breath, and you're like, but your success is just the flip side of your failure. Yeah, like you're literally just telling us we failed less this year than we failed before. And we would have failed even less if you gave us more money, but you should give us more money because look at the success. And you're like, in no other industry, in no other institution, even within the government, do you get to crow about your success with 75% failure. It's crazy.
Only through a monopoly of service as well as a monopoly on violence could they actually pull that off.
That's correct.
Only with those two things. So
yes,
at the end of the day, I think I'm open to any ideas. Right. The biggest one is to get the government all the way out, but we're so far from that. At this point, you're a homeschooler. I'm a homeschooler.
Right.
Does it cost $13,000 to homeschool a kid?
Not even close. And this is, I'm so glad you asked me that, because when I hear from people and they talk about school choice and, they say, well, what would you do? What would you do? And I'm like, I am doing it. So we have to get people to recognize that you already have school choice.
Yeah.
You can choose today to either send your kid to private school, send your kid, homeschool your child, join a micro school, form a little co-op, there's so many, hire private tutors, and then, do school on the weekend. Like that, you have choices now. Your child doesn't, the government doesn't come to the door, kidnap your kid every morning and take them to the local school. In every state, homeschooling is legal, obviously within parameters. Now, if you're a foster parent or stuck in a divorce situation, but those are outliers. I was one of them, so I know. But at the same time, you have choices. What you don't have is the choice to not pay your tax. And that's the same as the choice you don't have to pay your Social Security tax, Medicare tax, like all the taxes that you pay for services. Do you sit there and go, give me back my Medicare because I'm going to want to buy Medicare supplemental insurance and I don't think Medicare is going to be good enough? The public version of healthcare when I'm over whatever age is going to be good enough for me? No, we don't hear that choice movement saying give back. But for school, it's kind of like, no, it's okay to keep that. I just want my piece of the pie back. No, you either want autonomy or you don't, is kind of my perspective on it. And you're choosing now not to have autonomy. You're choosing that they get to keep the money. You're choosing to let them continue to take the money and just dole it out differently. But I'm the bad guy for suggesting that you just want more ways to comply with government. Like, give me a softer pillow in my prison cell. Like, that's not, obviously that's hyperbolic, but it's
hyperbolic, but it's accurate. I mean, that's the reality of what the whole system is. Like,
right.
That 13,000 per student, we're paying the taxes. And that's one of the big problems I have as a libertarian, right? If our taxes were being spent efficiently and we had wonderful roads and bridges and all of our children had, world-class educations.
Right.
I don't know if I'd fight as hard against the evils of taxation, but when you're spending $13,000 to educate a student in this state, and like someone in the chat said, they do it for about 500. I pay 450 for my core curriculum, and then I add on field trips and all these other things that we want to do to control that cost.
Right.
13,000 per student. I just want economic efficiency. So like if you could at least make this system produce better outcomes, I'd be less upset about it. It's like, that's why war. I hate our spending on war, especially, because now, okay, you're using my tax dollars to drop a $500,000 bomb on someone who makes $500 a year. Just the economic elements of it. I'd be a lot less mad if you were spending my tax dollars in at least a logical and efficient way, targeting good outcomes. But right now, the tax liability keeps going up. The debt keeps going up because we're spending, deficit spending, and we're spending deficit spending on horrible results. Like in a free market, if you're getting bad results, you vote with your dollars and you do something else. And this is a stranglehold system with this monopoly. And I think at least if you force competition, that's really what I came down to. Where I can't get rid of the Department of Education. Our Constitution says I can't run on a platform of abolishing public schools, right? Our Constitution puts that there. But if I could put together that one idea, how do we make it so that the schools have to actually compete for their dollars? Where maybe through economies of scale, they have all this infrastructure, these existing buildings. Maybe they could get rid of these, $300,000 regional administrators who are, pushing political agendas as opposed to actually educating students. Maybe they could reallocate those dollars to pay the teachers more, who are like, just make that system better. And if they won't do that, and those dollars have to go to wherever the parents do it, and if someone's able to provide a solution that's giving their kid a better education, well, the public schools are either going to abolish themselves because they won't be able to compete, or they'll have to get their stuff together and compete. And maybe we'll end up with better public schools.
And maybe teachers will have more choices too. Because to your point, I mean, I'll be honest, I wouldn't teach in a North Carolina school right now for all the money you could pay me a 6-figure salary today. I wouldn't take the job because I would never want to work in those conditions. It's not worth it. My life is worth more, and my life would be in danger in many of these schools. Not to mention the fact that I wouldn't teach the stuff that they'd make me teach. So autonomy is worth something. There are people leaving teaching to go open micro schools, making a tiny fraction of what they were making without benefits. Like they're having to go buy their benefits on the open market. And they're happy as little clams to do it because they went into teaching because they actually wanted to teach, and they would rather have that autonomy. So this kind of a situation where parents can make that choice would, I think, also open up doors for more teachers. Now, I'm told, by the way, and before I say what I'm about to say, Thomas Watercott says the current federal contribution education is around $3,000 per student. This would be North Carolina, I'm assuming. Nullification wouldn't be that costly. We just take make this up. That's what I say too, Thomas. And I'm trying to popularize this idea because that way we could get the monkey off our back of the federal government. And right now, I hate to say it, but as bad as North Carolina itself is and has been, as far as some of the elements within North Carolina, the federal government is really the one pushing the most onerous controls, the ones that I feel strongly the Republican bills do not address. The Republican bills go along and accept it. They don't even talk about it. They don't even really, they say, we can keep the strings off while they're busy redefining what homeschooling is. We can, it's okay. Yes, your home will suddenly be called a school, and that might mean that you can't have a gun in your home, but it's okay. It's fine. Like, they're not really thinking about liberty. They're not looking to restore your liberty. They're just saying, how can we move the dollars around so that we can buy ourselves a little more political capital? That's what I see. And I don't think that in data, and I don't think that that's really helping people. What it sounds like your plan does is by putting the money literally in the hands of the parent without, like, we're literally just sending you a debit card. We're not making you fill out forms. It's like, oh, you're a North Carolina taxpayer. We have your address. You have 3 kids under the age of 18. Here you go. that simple, right? Is that what I understand it? Not fill out these 10 forms and give us all of your data about all your kids and what you're going to do with them and where you're going to send them. And then maybe we'll send you money. It's more like the census shows, here you go.
That would be the way to do it if you truly wanted to break the monopoly, right? I want the government to have as little power as possible in a perfect world. Again, I do think that if the Department of Education and even the public school system went away, in the long run, right? In the long run, that would be good for society. Now, there are some challenges there, right? We don't want to just do away with it with nothing to replace it. We want, starting from that baseline, we want an educated, skilled society. That's good for all of us if our population is well educated. So having an off ramp, and I think the way that works is if you make them compete, the off ramps will build, right? Where you talk about how right now you wouldn't go work for the public school system for a 6-figure salary, right? The way I see it is if you truly broke that monopoly and had the government doing nothing more than saying, okay, we're distributing this so that each kid is getting this there. And I know the reality is the General Assembly, like they're going to muck it up. They're going to build in all kinds of pork and loopholes and all kinds of things because that's what the uniparty always does. But the closer we can get to limiting that, because I know that there's no way that they're going to say no oversight, right? Oh, we're just going to give everybody no oversight. I'm sure they'll put some layers in there, but I would argue that especially at a macro level in the long run, the more you try to do that, the more you're increasing your administrative costs. I think that pushing any sort of policing of that to the most local level is probably the best way to go. Because, what does someone in Raleigh know about how the school system is in Cherokee?
Right? The challenge, though, is that every North Carolinian pays taxes.
Yeah.
Whether they have kids or not. Every landowner. I mean, here's a commenter saying, random question. I'm a landowner in North Carolina. I have tenants in North Carolina with kids. I pay the property taxes. They don't. Do I eventually get a refund? So in other words, you have people who own land or own properties. They're paying the property taxes. That money is going into the education fund and the money will go straight to these people. And you can say, well, we want an educated population. I mean, this is the socialist argument. It's for the greater good. All this, we're doling out the money. It's always been this way. All those arguments, but they're not libertarian arguments. Libertarian argument is, ma'am, you shouldn't have to pay that because you don't have kids. You're not using the service. So, I mean, is there the possibility of, going to a service model? In other words, a literal opt-out on the North Carolina taxes. So whether it's your county tax, for obviously you can't control the county, but if you did at the state level of like, check the box, I don't want my property taxes going to the education fund, whether I have kids or I don't. And I can literally opt out completely. And if I have kids, get them educated some other kind of way. If I don't have kids, I'm not paying for other people's kids to be educated. Because I mean, I did not have kids longer than I've had. I was single till I was 36. And I used to resent the living hell out of, paying high taxes. I lived in Chicago for people's kids to go to school and I didn't have kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so this is kind of going out several steps, right? And the reality of this, right? I'm a third party running for governor of the state. A lot of it is kind of putting some ideas out there, providing a choice that for someone else. And if that crazy thing happens and about 2.4 million North Carolinians check a box, then we can change things. But the reality is that's the status quo, right? Do I think of it as where I both own property and homeschool my child, so I'm paying for the public school system?
I know, same. Yeah.
So on day one, I'm not changing any of that. What I'm trying to do is break the state's monopoly, because what happens is if we're able to successfully break the state's monopoly, we'll see that educational outcomes will start to get better because all of the bloat, all of the things that the school system pays for in a free market that's driven by individuals making decisions that actually carry risk, right? Where you take the risk. I believe that free market competition will ultimately result in better education. So at a bare minimum, I'm looking baseline is we don't get any relief on our taxes, but we get better at education. Because I said from the beginning, I'm a libertarian, and I understand that, yes, my plan is essentially socialism. But so is the status quo. So that kind of goes to
well, and the
future
school
states.
choice model per the GOP is 100%
That's socialism too.
socialism.
Yeah,
Actually, it's got a little smattering of fascism thrown in when you consider the fact that they're going to be sending money to private entities that they're then going to tell how they need to operate their private entity. Like, you own it, you run it, you hire the people, you fire the people, you do that, but you just do it our way. Like,
yeah,
you do
you just make sure that we're ultimately in control.
Yeah, ultimately we're in control. That's not socialism. So, because they're still coming in and telling the organization what to do, and even in the best bills I've read, there's room for that. There's really nothing that puts up a guardrail that is so secure that they will not be allowed to tell homeschoolers how to run their homeschool, or private schools how to run their private schools, Christian schools, Jewish schools, whatever. At least it sounds like what you're proposing is that you're saying, okay, look, I literally can't change the tax code overnight. I can't change the Constitution.
What do we need to do to change it? We need to change the Constitution, right? Like, in order to actually do away with this system where they're taking our tax dollars for the school system, we need to change the Constitution.
So you need a generation of people properly educated to understand that that would be a good idea. Unfortunately, this is the long game talking now. And this is why, you know, one of the reasons I oppose their plan and think your plan, even though it's not, you know, perfect. People accuse me, you're making the perfect enemy of the good. I'm like, no, the perfect would be I snap my fingers and the Constitution is amended, and this isn't the case. Even I am not pushing for the perfect. What I am saying is you've got to close that distance between the money and the student. And having the dollars follow the student is not good enough in my book. Good enough is the dollars literally go to the student. And after that, the government is out of it. It's out of it. And that way, to your point, at least the purchase is literally being made from amongst all the choices, literally all the choices, by the parents. And I agree with you that, you know, people say, well, they don't need $13,000 per kid. And like, they don't need it now, but they spend it. At least you don't have not just the government bloat, which seems to grow every year because their budgets have to grow, but also the political concern. See, right now, and this is one of my big complaints about school choice, Republican style, doing it the way they're doing it still puts it in the realm of politics. It now, every election cycle, both sides of the uniparty are going to come and go, I want this oversight. I want this extra thing, but I want this extra thing. And they're going to duke it out over, you know, who gets to have more say in where the dollars are going. And the only reason they'll even have that case to make is that the dollars are first hanging out in government and being doled out for purpose. In other words, not doled out because you're a kid, but just doled out according to different rules. And it's the rules that are exposed to the political process. Take that away, and it instantly becomes less political. The most they could do is campaign on, we don't know where this money's going. It's going to the children, but you don't know what they're spending it on. Well, it's a lot easier to argue that it's really not up to government to decide how people parent their children. You're not telling us how to feed them. You're not telling us how to clothe them. And they'll say, we're not giving you the money for that. Aren't you though? What happens when you send out food stamp or EBT cards? Is the government coming in and going, did you feed them good, healthy food today? Now, they can't buy, you know, beer and lobster tail, but beyond that, they're allowed to buy all manner of crap with EBT cards. They could be feeding their kid a steady diet of chicken nuggets or something. And the government doesn't come in and supervise that. Isn't food arguably more important than, you know, what they're teaching them? So it's a lot easier, I think, tell me if you agree, to turn back to the politicians and say, where do you get off deciding what they should be buying
100%.
Once they're already buying it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that's where, you know, as a libertarian, it's not hard to put yourself in authoritarian shoes, right? And think through, oh, what would be a good solution here? I mean, it'd be a good idea if we only had healthy food and like exercised an hour a day, right? But I don't think anybody's calling for the government to like mandate that you have to exercise if you want Medicare, right?
Yeah.
Like, so why are we doing that within the school system? Oh, if you want access to these school choice vouchers, you have to make sure that your school is doing exactly what we say and teaching the exact, it's sad that they almost like kind of push more tyranny under the lenses of certain things. And really they're going to push whatever they can that we take as a society, right? Why do we not say, oh, you're going to completely control my diet and exercise status for me to qualify for Medicare? Well, the people wouldn't accept that. But
you'd like to think so, but they tried to make us get a vaccine.
Right. Well, but that one comes down to, hey, we were able to convince you to do like this one short thing, right? That's as opposed to, hey, a lifestyle change of, hey, you're going to have to go to the gym 3 days a week kind of thing. Right. And it's just, I want less government involvement. And that's one thing, I at one point in my life, I was a Republican, right? Because I believed in limited government. And then I realized that, I'm 41 years old. I haven't seen Republicans limit government at any level at any point in my life. So why am I supporting?
I'd have to go all the way back to Calvin Coolidge to find that.
They always, whether it's R's or D's, they're always going to seize a little bit more power for the system itself. And I think if we don't start a grassroots movement to really, really relentlessly and targetedly fight back against that, I hope we don't have libertarians start winning in America for the same reasons that a libertarian had to win in Argentina, right? Like, hopefully we can get some government limiting forces in place to restore true free markets to the United States, before our politicians screw it up to the point where we have 150% year over year inflation multiple years in a row. Because it's not that far off, when we're in a situation where we're 35 trillion in debt. That's $250,000 per taxpayer. We're deficit funding everything. Our taxes don't even cover our current spending, which lends me to be like, well, why are you taxing us at all at this point? If you're making the case that we can just print money, well, just print it and leave my stuff alone, and I'll deal with kind of the silent tax. But they're not going to do any of that unless we, the people, find some way to organize and find peaceful methods to make them do that, right? And I truly think that, if you get a county, right? Like, again, I'm running for governor. It's a statewide race. It's not the lowest hanging fruit for libertarians to win, right? But if you were to have some kind of, a county school board or something that really were to take and push nullification and really test the limits of that and fight back, I think that that's how you do it, is at the local level where everyone kind of has the most connectivity within their communities. And I think that the first communities that actually try to do these things, and especially if for some reason I win this and we're able to do this in North Carolina, I think that the long-term impact, we are going to attract some of the best teachers on planet Earth if we had a free market education system. You'd go from a place where the best teachers would want to come here. They'd want to innovate. They'd want to find out, how can we invent a whole new way to educate children in this modern world, leveraging. I'm not a teacher. I'm a financial planner. I'm a business owner. But what I know is that if this system is so broken now that it's foolish to just like I look at it, the Republicans are basically just trying to make the current system infect other systems. And the Democrats are just trying to throw as much money as they can at an already broken system. And maybe it's because I'm a capitalist, like a true free market capitalist. But I believe if you just allow the market to drive all of these things and stop trying to centrally plan them, I think the evidence suggests that we'll at a minimum get a better outcome, better educational outcomes. Whether that's enough to justify the taxes is a whole other thing. I'd love to see us get wonderful educational outcomes, and then maybe that next generation smart enough to realize, hey, we don't need the government to be doing all of this by force anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm one of those weird extremists that thinks that the government shouldn't concern itself with outcomes. It should concern itself with protecting individual liberty. That is the sole purpose of the government, in my view. And so therefore, whether or not a student has a good outcome, it only matters now because they are conscripting the dollar. They're taking the dollars from you by force, and they're forcing the children into the school. So they have to be concerned with outcomes, because the rest of us who are having our children sort of forced into that situation and our dollars forced out of our wallets are demanding that they answer for that. And of course, every year, what do? They come up with new reasons it's our fault the taxpayers and the parents, that the outcomes suck. You didn't give us enough money, and you're not parenting your kids properly, and you haven't let them be on the phones too much, and you're lazy, and you're too greedy, and you're this, and you're that. Unless, of course, you're historically marginalized, and then nothing is your fault, and everything is the fault of people who are not historically marginalized, and so on and so forth. So they have many, many cover stories for why they're not accountable for their own failure, but they turn around and say that they care about outcomes because it's politically expedient to do so, because we're all going to say that they should. But
because we care about outcomes.
We care about outcomes, but it's really not the government's job. It's not an elected official's job to care how happy you are, how well you do in life, how mentally healthy you are. And we are taking these things as like axiomatic that simply aren't, that our government should care about us. No, they shouldn't. The government exists to enforce the laws that protect individual liberty, period, full stop. And everything it does beyond that, it does poorly because it shouldn't be doing it. So that's my weird extremist position. But what I
don't think that's extreme. I would agree with that 100%. And if that makes me an extremist, then I guess I'm an extremist.
Right. So what I would love to do now, if it's all right with you, is I'm going to throw at you as a devil's advocate here, the arguments that are being made right now by Republicans for the voucher ESA model. And then I would love to hear the Mike Ross response to that, because I get these all the time. I give them my response, but I'm curious. I was like, just if I care, I want to see someone else do it.
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing is, I say this, I'm not for this. This is just growing government. You're being irrational. We can't change anything about the status quo. So we're giving choice back to parents, and you are being irrational.
They say that you're being irrational.
I'm being irrational to say that this is more government control, and that then they say we are giving parents a choice. We're putting the choice back in the hands of parents, and you're being irrational to not see it that way.
Okay. So I would challenge, is this someone because there's some people who are, is this one of the trolls that does this, or
no.
am I trying to change this person's mind?
These are the official proponents of school choice who are out there doing the little state by state little tour, stumping for the candidates, stumping for the policies, promoting the bills, whipping people to vote for their bills.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask them, based on who that is, if you're going around and you're actively supporting school choice, right? That this current system of, hey, we're going to give you a voucher to go to these existing schools for a fraction of what is coming out to the public school system. So if you actually understand the economics, that means the public school that no longer has to meet the service still gets some of the money. This person gets a portion of the money to go to this other school. But in order to do that, we're going to give elected officials power over that school. And you're telling me that just giving that money directly to the parents is the irrational choice here. I would just say that that's interesting, and I don't see it that way. That I would think that the idea of splitting it in a way that gives more power to elected officials and ultimately shortchanges the ability for that parent to direct the dollars that are supposedly being spent, per student. I think that that's not rational. I think that the actual rational position is, if you want good outcomes, not saying the government should want good outcomes. If you want good outcomes, you should focus on making sure there is as much competition as possible. And the best way to do that is to make that make the public schools compete in a meaningful way, right? And competing in a meaningful way, because that's not really creating real competition if you're giving a fraction to it. Because ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to find a situation where, okay, maybe you get 7,000, right? I think that's the number that they're floating around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, now there's sure going to be a bunch of $8,000 private schools now. I mean, that's just, maybe I'm crazy, but I from what I've seen in every other thing where you're giving out government money like that, that's still going to happen.
But you can keep your plan. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. The cost isn't going to go up, Mike.
Right. Yeah,
it's not going to suddenly go up because there's a giant honeypot of money to be bilked.
If we're able to cap it, right, where you say, look, 13,000 is, and 13,000 is more than enough money to educate a student. more than enough money. And I can say this as someone who has sent my kid to private school when COVID hit, and I was basically being forced to homeschool, yet still pay for private school. And I realized, hey, I can do this. That's when we switched.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go buy the exact same curriculum for like a few $100 instead of thousands of. So when you go through that process and you realize that that's there, as soon as there's competition, and you see this in any industry where there's true free market competition, you see one of two things happening, or a combination of those two things. One, you're going to see prices go down, and two, you're going to see quality go up, or some connection somewhere between there. But if you have those two forces taking place within the education system, right, is quality improving and prices going down, in the long run, as technology continues to innovate, we'll have a real meaningful push, especially if we get things at the federal level, to ultimately bring this system down, right? Like as things continue to move, we can actually start to lower the cost, because 13,000 more than enough. Maybe then the goal is, hey, we're getting all these great outcomes at 13,000 a student. Can we keep those outcomes at 12,000? Right. Can we keep them at 10? Right. And then you let market forces ultimately determine that. And when you get enough pressure one way or another, maybe that future educated generation says, hey, we don't need the government to do this at all. We don't need them to be in the business of collecting and redistributing the money anymore. So we're going to get it out of our Constitution, and we're going to take this existing market education system, let it continue to work. Because what I found as a candidate, right? Like I knew there's good in the world, but as you travel the state, there's a lot of teachers that truly care about educating students. So, that's another common one that I see when I'm talking to someone who's like really left-wing on this issue, is what's going to happen in these marginalized communities that are underserved. Well, one, how much worse can it be than what's happening right now? Where, that presentation in Mecklenburg, right? A 5% success rate, and the goal to get it to 25%.
Well, and it's so condescending. Yeah. It's so like, what's going to happen to them? Like they talk about parents in these situations as if it's never happened in America before, that parents who don't speak English, maybe even at all, or who are working multiple jobs, or who knows what their situation is, that they, knows if the government doesn't, take care of it, their kids can't get an education. Well, that's just demonstrably false. History is replete with examples of parents who came to America to get their kid a better situation, and all that you really needed to do was get the heck out of their way and let them choose. Maybe they have to get some things translated, but this notion that you need experts. I need government, state experts, people with fancy degrees and PhDs, whatever, to tell me how to discern if a school is going to work for my kids, if a school is going to offer what I think my child should have, is just demonstrably false. We tried it your way for over 100 years, and this is the result. The poor communities are just as poor. They're still full of poor people. They're still full of, even the people on the left will be like, oh, we have so much more progress to make. It's like, y'all have been in charge of this. Literally, progressives have been in charge of education, hook, line, and sinker for 100 years. And they have not successfully gotten rid of this problem. Maybe give somebody else a try. And that brings me to my next question, my next devil's advocate question, which is, but Deb, this is a free market solution. Vouchers and ESAs are a free market solution. Parents are going to be able to make that choice. They'll take the voucher and they'll take the ESA to their school of choice. And my first comment is, okay, so they live in rural North Carolina or rural Kansas or rural Illinois or rural somewhere else, and there isn't a line of private schools lined up for them. That isn't an option. And so what if they wanted to use that 13,000 per kid to go, now I don't need to work that part-time job. I could stay home and I can use my 13 grand to homeschool my kid. Are you saying no, they can't? Because then that's not really a free market option. Free market to me is literally, the person holding the money, can spend it, not spend it, spend half of it, spend more of it, like on whatever the heck I want and call it education. And that's not for you to decide. Am I wrong?
No, I would agree that in a true free market, parents, communities ultimately determine what it is. Like I think of, think of the history of this country, right? Where I live was a mill town. Okay, so we had a bunch of these textile mill towns throughout North Carolina, and it all went overseas. But when you look at the founding of some of these towns, these mills would come in, they'd build a bunch of housing, they would build the schools, they built all of these things that in 2024 everyone just says, oh, only governments do this.
I know, right? They have
right,
a school.
yeah, and when they attack homeschooling as an experiment. What do you mean an experiment? Government school is the experiment that after 100 plus years is failing. Homeschooling has been what we've been doing for thousands of years, and I can tell you, and I get every kid is different, and I'm maybe lucky that I've got a pretty easy kid, but I sent him to a private school first, or through fourth grade. Then we switched and have been homeschooling, and he's in seventh grade now. And his test scores, standardized test scores, we do them because as a homeschool you have to here in North Carolina. I care about his education. Since homeschooling, his grade level testing has gone up. Like and that just tells me, people who attack homeschooling, at the end of the day, the single most important thing is having parents, or not even necessarily parents, but someone who truly cares about that kid and that future. So, for in an optimal situation, right, having parents that care about that kid and want to invest in it, that's the perfect scenario. You could have parents succeed and create a child that has the ability to think and skills to compete in the real world. They could do that homeschooling with no money if they wanted to, right? They could do that if they wanted to. Similarly, you can have parents who have all the money in the world and can send their kid to a $40,000 a year private school. And if they don't get involved and help and be a part of that, you can get bad outcomes. So what I think, the reality, I'm a realist. I understand there are some really crappy parents in this country, in this world, and in this state. But what I see in places there's usually some family member, maybe an aunt, maybe a grandma, maybe just a neighbor, right? Like those are the things. There are resources within the communities that can do that. And I think that this issue, and I went to public school, right? I went to public school my entire, my entire years of school. The reality of that system is I don't think that a one size fits all approach is going to work, where you can have hundreds or thousands of kids crammed into a place being taught some centrally. You're just, to think that you could get an outcome where most of the population succeeds in this system, I think it's illogical to even think that could work in the first place, right? Where I see a lot of the data I look at is, hey, having a small classroom size, having more individual attention, having a mentor, micro schools. And if you have a free market, that becomes much more realistic to actually expect to happen.
I think the problem I also have is that I don't want to get stuck in the paradigm of school. So in other words, we've got to get back, in my opinion, to talking about education.
Yeah.
Education is not schooling, and schooling is not education. Now, that doesn't mean that education can't happen inside of a school. And it doesn't mean, that, all schools are bad or anything like that. It just means that we tend to think of, kids need school. Without school, kids won't get an education. That's just false.
Yeah.
And education is not a commodity, and it's not, and neither are our children for that matter. They're not commodities to be bought, sold, traded, you go to this building, you go to that building. We tend to treat them that way. I know in North Carolina, because of busing, they've been treated that way to a large extent, where it's kind of like, well, this school is 60% white and we need to have more minorities. So we're going to take this percentage of kids from this zip code and we're going to put them on a bus and send them over there. We treat our kids like they're little widgets to be plugged into the system, and that they work for the system as opposed to the system working for them, that they're just, like part of this weird organism or cell called education. And they're not. They're free and sovereign individuals, I thought, in the United States of America with individual liberties. And so as a consequence, they should own their education. And at least with your plan, it sounds like you're saying you're taking the dollars and you're acknowledging philosophically that this was intended. Wasn't it North Carolina? Wasn't it General Assembly? Wasn't it, Constitution of North Carolina intended to educate individual North Carolinians. Okay, well, that's what we're going to do with it, and put them in a position at least to argue on behalf of, no, it belongs to our prosperity zones. No, it's about our economic resources. Our kids are economic resources. And by the way, that's how they talk about them.
Of course.
So put them in a position where they have to start telling parents, your kid is my cog in the machine. Your kid doesn't belong to himself or herself. And then maybe we can have these discussions. But I actually want to start talking away from the word school and more towards education, so that we can at least broach that topic. Because one of my arguments, and this brings me to the next one. So we discussed the free market. Oh, it's a free market solution. And then my next one that I say to the Republicans is, why do you call it choice? Why are you calling it school choice? Why is it not education liberty? Why do you think that what parents want is a different choice of school? Why are we still in the school paradigm? And this is the one they have no answer for. This is the one they just kind of seem like, well, this is what we have. Kids have to go to school. It's the law. Like, well, then what about homeschooling? And then what you find is they've written into their laws that homeschool is now a school. And I don't know what to say to them on that. Look at you like a puppy sideways. Like, what do you mean? How's a person going to get educated?
I mean, that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. Because I see that so often with both Republicans and Democrats, where their own positions are not able to be rationalized, right? Like you take the certain arguments where they look at it here, right? Where, just using polarizing issues, differences between mainstream R's and D's, right? Where I think when you look at the abortion argument and how the left and right split on that one, and you can kind of rationalize, and I argue from that perspective of as a libertarian, like it's not. I don't think we should be centrally planning anything. At the end of the day, I'm very much a believer in the idea of smaller local governance, back to how we were when the country was founded, right? As far as that level, I'd love to see that level of federal government, especially on the spending side. But that's where they run into a wall with those, because at the end of the day, if someone, and you see it a lot more from the right, Republicans are like, yeah, we love free markets. But you point them into the reality. You point them into the reality that this is not a free market, right? If you are defining who the players are, you are still putting the government thumb on the economic scales. I am a true believer in the Austrian School of Economics. I want the government to take their thumb off of every economic scale there is, whether it's education, schools, healthcare. Having the government put their thumb and pick winners and losers, whether it's with direct dollars or with ideology pushing. That's a big one in the education world, right? Where they look at it and say, hey, maybe we're getting, maybe the kids can't, maybe the kids can't do math, but we've taught them to trust and love the government. Maybe that's like an acceptable win to them. I don't know. It's
well, and here's the thing too, is that with the Republican model of school choice, and I tell this to conservatives all the time, the money can just as well go to the voucher. The ESA can just as well go to the queer school, or the Bill and Melinda Gates School of the Greater Tomorrow, or whatever they want to come up with, and as it could go to your wonderful little Christian school, or your libertarian oriented classical school, or whatever, because it can, because this is freedom, right? And then people say, well, wouldn't it be able to do that with Mike's plan? And my argument there would be, yes, of course. However, because it's not exposed to the political process, it would be the individual parents making that choice. There wouldn't be that political thumb on the scale of, we're giving more money, or we're putting we're putting fewer requirements on the school that adopts the queer theory, et cetera, and so forth, as the ones that are Christian. We're not telling, the government can't tell the Christian school they can no longer teach Christian stuff. They can't tell the libertarian school they can't do that. They can't force anybody to put extra bathrooms or whatever. In other words, right now, if, let's say, Josh Stein were to win the governorship and Mo Green were to win the Department of Public Instruction spot in North Carolina, and you pass school choice in North Carolina some kind of way, now you have Josh Stein and Mo Green in charge of school choice. And where are they putting their thumb on the scale? So if they're going to go ahead and appeal to the communities that voted for them that want school choice because their school's failing, but they want to go ahead and go to that Bill and Melinda Gates School of the Critical Race Theory, Better Tomorrow, whatever, then the rest of North Carolina is having their tax dollars be siphoned to those schools, potentially to the exclusion of schools they do like. And they're paying again for some more people to teach their kids to hate us. So because it's exposed to the political process. If it's not, it's in the hands of individual people, and nobody like Mo or Josh or anybody else can stick their thumb on the scale of where the money's going and what restrictions are on the schools, then that can't happen. Then I, even as a taxpayer, am less worried because I'm not a hypocrite. If you want to send your kid to the Bill and Melinda Gates School with your own money, I'm not, that's your business. Freedom of speech, freedom of association. I just don't want my tax dollars going there with government's blessing, with government going like, oh yes, you can have it because you guys support us politically, but you can't have it because you don't.
Well, that's kind of the goal of my plan, right? Is to break the monopoly on education. I fully envision, if my plan was put out to kind of the way it exists in my head, how it would play out, right? You would have some really progressive schools. You'd have some, really religious schools. Every type of school could exist. But the question is, can that school exist based on the decision-making of the consumers, right? So in a particular neighborhood, the Bill and Melinda Gates School of CRT, as would do well and attract them. And then there's other places there. I don't care what these schools are doing. I care about, are we getting the government out of that decision-making and putting it in the hands of the parents? Because I believe that'll get us better outcomes. And then, 10, 20 years down the line, hopefully we'll have an educated enough population that is seen, hey, getting them out of the decision-making process and having them essentially be nothing more than, money movers, that worked out well. Our education outcomes are better. Maybe we should seek to do the same thing and get them out of all of these other areas of our life that they're in. And again, once you get it down to all they're doing is playing middleman with the money, so to speak, that's an easy problem to solve. Like, if that's the only thing they're doing. So it becomes, how do you, because again, first best option is do away with all of this, right? But that's something that, between the Constitution as well as kind of the will, I would much rather dismantle systems that shouldn't exist in a way that does not create negative outcomes for people. Not because I think the government should care about outcomes, but I think we as a society should care about the outcomes of people, because too many bad outcomes that someone else may have may cause that person to now impact my life, right? So you get the government out of it. I think that ultimately we'll probably have a bunch of schools that some people hate. And that's okay. Don't send your kid there.
That's always been the case, though. I mean, that's been the case always with private schools and so on. So the way I look at it is, your plan is just, ironically, it's more egalitarian than the Republicans' plan. So it may be still socialist, but it's more egalitarian, because it doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in, what zip code you live in, or how, whether there's a school near you or not, private school or otherwise, you're going to get the same amount of money as somebody, who has it. Now, some people say, well, the rich people are going to get too. It's like, yeah, them's the breaks. But people who pay no taxes are going to get it too. So, it all comes out in the wash in that respect. You're just getting the government out of, putting their thumb on the scale, and that same poor family can choose what to do with it. So, for example, if they find that in their household, it actually costs them money for both parents to go to work because of childcare expenses and so on and so forth, and they can't afford, or there isn't a private school, as I said, they could say, you know what, I could stay home on this coming in for education and do the homeschooling instead of going out to a job. And then we don't have to have the second car. We don't have to have, all these other expenses and the wardrobe and the eating lunch out and all the other things. And actually it's going to end up, making it possible for us to parent our own children which could be, for the family that's lower to middle income, than before they were both forced out of the house. And people are constantly complaining about these kids have no supervision, parents aren't really parenting. Well, who are the families most likely to have both parents in the workplace? Middle to low income people are in that situation. And so this could free that up. Or the person who says, I don't need 13 grand per kid to educate my kids, but that could help me pay somebody to do some of my childcare, and then have, a tutor for my special needs kid. And so your plan seems to be the most free market and the most capable of allowing individual parents to solve their individual problems related to the education of their children, as opposed to the Republican plan that seems to just kind of put a Band-Aid on what it is, a glitch in the system, as far as there aren't enough parents don't feel like they can get out of the school they hate and go to something else they might like better. Emphasis on might like better. But they're really not changing the core structure there. They're just making it bigger. They're kind of going, like I said, here's some more choices of how to comply with our requirements, all of which can change. Those requirements attached to what a school is, what's accredited, what you need to do, that's going to stay the same. And then I wanted to ask you about unions. So right now in North Carolina, the Teachers Association does not have collective bargaining. Other people watching come from states where they do. And one of the arguments that I've made is that the Republican model of school choice, while they say they hate it, the Democrats and the teachers associations, I think they actually secretly like it. And here's my argument. Tell me if you think this holds water.
Okay.
They're first of all getting a portion of the money still. With tax dollars going into the private systems and even to homeschools, I can see, first of all, unions having a bigger platform to say, if they're getting tax dollars, they should be hiring certified teachers. So in other words, right now, private schools are not under an obligation to hire state certified teachers. Most do, but a lot still don't. And one of the things that the Teacher Association sort of has in their corner is that public schools require certification. So if they want to lobby the General Assembly or where in your state, your legislature, whatever, if they want to lobby to say all those teaching in a school receiving tax dollars must be state certified according to the certification plans that we're lobbying you to make, the requirements we're lobbying you to make, that could do two things. First of all, put a big onerous requirement on people who want to teach in the private schools and on the schools themselves to pay enough to warrant that. And the certification requirements could be political. They could be ideological, which we know they are now. And that means that the teachers they hire could be very, very friendly to unionizing within the private sector. And we already know that in private schools in some of the big cities, there are big movements to try to unionize private school teachers. This is without school choice. So one of the things that concerns me, and I've brought to people's attention, is don't you think that's going to ramp up and get to be a bigger risk? Do you think it is, or do you think I'm being irrational? Like they say.
Yeah. So when it comes to unions, right? And I have to look at this. It's not part of my platform, right? I haven't really touched on unions, but I'm all for private unions. I'm fully against public sector unions, right? The idea that people can lobby and unionize against the taxpayer, essentially, right? Like any sort of public union, I don't care what it is. If you're a union that's unionizing against the public purse, I am against all unions, right? And if people want to get together and go against a corporation or a small bit, whatever it may be, I'm fine with that. Under the grounds of freedom of association, I think private unions are just fine. I think that if you really freed up the market, because I see it. I've got a buddy who's a brick mason, right? And he's a non-union brick mason, and he loves the unions, even though he's a non-union brick mason, because the unions put all this pressure to drive up wages. And he's like, I'm not a part of any of this, and I just kind of reap the benefit of it. I think if that's there, maybe, but I don't have any fear of private sector unions, right? Like you're going to have, and you always have had, some kind of pressure between employers and employees. You have it kind of
But if it's
in
coming
everything.
from the public sector union, so in other words, I'm with you on the private sector unions. What my concern is that public sector unions are so political. That's the big difference, right? And so if they feel like they're in competition,
Right.
which they will be, even with the Republican bills, they'll be in competition.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the pressure will be on them, in my opinion, to lobby for changes either to teacher certification or to the standards that are allowed for schools to get the money and so on in the private, to kind of, again, put their finger on the scale.
Sure.
And I think they'd be happy either way. Either make it so onerous that the private schools can't really compete very well with the public, or force the private to essentially become public schools. So in other words, have their teachers, their members still be able to get to, be as competitive to get the jobs in the private schools, because now the private schools have to hire them.
Well, I think we would need to resist that. And I mean, this is kind of getting into bigger ones, but now we're talking about essentially occupational licensing, right? I mean,
Yes, exactly.
That's essentially what you're running into, is occupational licensing,
right?
Where they would just expand.
And we have that in North Carolina. We do.
Yeah. Well, to an extent, right? Like I'm not, as a homeschooler.
No. For teachers in the public schools, they're required to be certified, and they've changed things up recently to make it easier because of the teacher shortage.
Right.
But for a while, it was really strict. It was really hard. Now,
yeah, I mean, ideologically, I think we should be getting away with all of those. Like the government shouldn't be in the business of licensing anybody to do those things. So, I mean, if we get to a point, usually when I think of the reality of unions, when they've unionized, usually unions kind of arise and grow when there's a lot of grievances of the employees. If a teacher had the ability to truly access the education dollars, the amount of dollars that are supposedly spent on education, I don't see a whole lot of reason for them to even need to unionize.
No, that's
under my plan.
In your plan, I don't have that concern.
Okay, yeah.
I'm saying under the Republican plan, I do have the concern because, as I said, it's only a portion of the money that's going there. As it is, private school teachers are paid less than public school teachers. And if the public sector unions, the teachers union, comes in and starts putting pressure on lawmakers on their side of the aisle, which is, as we know, the Democrats, if they start putting pressure to change the licensure requirements such that the ones who already are in the public school have an advantage,
right?
In that the private schools now who are accepting voucher money or ESA money, have to hire, if not all certified, a percentage of certified, whatever, professionals into the school, or they don't get the voucher money or they don't get the ESA money. That gives the union, because they couldn't care less where their members are teaching, as long as they have members.
As long as they pay dues.
They don't want to lose membership. So if teachers start jumping ship and going to private schools because they're like, yeah, more choices, goody gumdrops, they lose members.
Right.
And so if the way they can hang on to their membership is to lobby their lawmakers to go, you need to require these private schools in exchange for the vouchers to only hire certified teachers, or the micro school has to be run by somebody with a license or whatever, and they have to be a member of our union, then that's my concern. Is I think they will do that. They will move to try to change licensure requirements and make them more strict, more onerous, or more broad reaching, because otherwise they're going to lose members. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah. That holds water. I think that's a very logical thought process of how that could play out. I think that's a very real and reasonable, potential problem that we could run into. And I think it ultimately comes down to, this is very much your area, where it's one of like many areas that I've had to get well versed and think about as a candidate. But it's going to take voices,
right,
talking about why this is a problem, and whether that's, I've been to events with some left-wing groups, some right-wing groups, everywhere in between, because I'm a libertarian and a radical libertarian at that. And I think that it's going to come on groups on both of those sides to fight that war on their own. We got to get the government out of it. And I truly hope that enough voices rise up, because that is a very, essentially, even if it's a private union, that's one of the bigger problems. I have a huge problem with lobbying as a whole, right? I got this email as a candidate, right? I got this email just earlier today where I'm like, what is this? And it's like a list of lobbyists in North Carolina.
Right.
It was a 237-page document, Deb, top to bottom, just name after name after name, with name, organizations represented, phone number, address. That's a big problem when we have these big, powerful groups that are writing laws. And I think that that's where, it's, again, we're veering off of school choice. I believe that the solution to most of our political problems are going to come in the form of the Declaration of Independence and the 10th Amendment, and taking those ideas. And if the federal government's trying to push something on the state that, the people of that state are like, no, you should have a governor and a legislature that has enough backbone to tell the federal government to flip off. And if enough North Carolinians check the box next to my name, I will definitely be the biggest thorn in the side of the federal government that ever exists. But we need to be able to do that at the local level too, where if some politicians in Raleigh go crazy about any issue, whether it's education, whether it's guns, healthcare, whatever it may be, if those local communities test that, and basically the same way I would want the state government to, give a middle finger to the federal government when they try to infringe on their rights, I want to see local governments testing it at the federal and the state level. And if we don't start really embracing localization and nullification, power is always going to seek to centralize naturally. Like it's going to continue to try to grow power. And the only way that we can fight against that is to try to actually tear that power away. And the most power that I've come from is the 10th Amendment really holds a way to test it. And nobody seems to have the backbone to test it. And I get it's because there's consequences, right? If you tell the federal government, no, we're going to cut off all the federal dollars. At this point, I don't know, maybe we're not at the point. At some point, it's very easy to see where you can get to a point where the regular people don't care what the government has to say. Just give them 150% inflation for 3 years and see what the people think of what the government's trying to ram down their throats.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But
let's hope it doesn't. But we can test it early.
Another argument I get, and I know the answer will probably have to be a philosophical one, though, is, but parents abuse children. So we have to have them go to school. This is one that's like against expanding homeschooling. So they're like all afraid of the kind of prop plan that you have, because the plan that you have will very, very likely increase homeschooling more than even private schooling. And so, I mean, it'll increase both, but it will certainly do more to help people homeschool who otherwise can't do it. Because it's enough money with no strings attached that people could say, I'm quitting my part-time job. It really is a substantial sum. And so people say, well, if they don't go to school of some kind, then kids are going to get abused. Abuse is just going to skyrocket. We won't have any way to know that these kids are getting abused. We have to have these kids go to school or we're going to miss the abuse. To which you say, what?
I mean, I think that the basis of that is a flawed logical fallacy anyway. Are the kids in school 24 hours a day? If not, then, I mean, is every single person who's employed by the state trained to detect signs of abuse? The idea that school is
does abuse not happen at the school?
Not to mention, like, I don't know about everybody else, but I haven't cared enough to really dig in to validate this the statistic, but it tracked with my lived experience. But it said, someone said that school is the one place that most people experience physical violence.
It's the first place usually. Mm-hmm.
That's the statistic I heard. Yeah. All I know is, I went to a magnet school for middle school that was not in the best of neighborhoods, and it was a middle and high school. Great program for math and science, and I went on to but I got beat up quite a bit when I was in middle school. I've never been beat up outside of a jujitsu class, which is voluntary, in my adult life, right? Like I'm not a violent person. So while the idea that, hey, maybe a teacher can come here and prevent that or notice it, that's an idea. And I'm sure there are some examples of that happening. But my question is, for every teacher that identifies a student who's being abused, how many kids are being abused in school? How many kids are being bullied, even if it's not physical abuse, mental, emotional abuse? The idea that the government is going to be the best safeguard for that, I just don't think holds water in the real world. The best thing that can protect those are engaged communities, right? Where and I think that my education plan, when I thought through that, when I said that, hey, my plan was designed to be better for three specific groups, right? It's students, teachers, and communities. Because I think if all of these micro schools, which there's some micro schools that have been doing great work, and as you said, they're paid very, very little in some cases. But those micro schools, especially in cases I've seen micro schools that like take kids that are like too problematic for even the public schools, like those will only strengthen communities if we had more of those. And if we provided an opportunity for that teacher who really, really loves kids and is there to help build better adults, if we empower them and give them an opportunity to not only do what they do well and make the lives of kids better and provide them a better education, but actually make a living doing that without having to really change the broader economics, without like doubling everybody's property taxes, but just let's spend that $13,000 per student as efficiently as we possibly can by letting every free market element, like ultimate consumer being the ultimate decision. Like if we do that, I think that it not only strengthens the education for the students, the experience for the teacher, but I think that that's actually something that will only further empower communities to solve their own problems, especially because, the education needs, like take school out, right? If we use the word school, the education needs of communities are different.
Well, I just thought of something else. I just thought of another benefit of your plan.
Yeah.
With the voucher and ESA plan, everybody's got to do the government's bookkeeping. So in other words, the parent recipient has to make sure all their paperwork is in order for the government entity that gave them the money so that they're in compliance. The school receiving the money has to probably employ a lawyer and an accountant and all kinds of things to make sure that they remain in compliance of whatever regulations so that they can remain a qualified recipient of ESAs and vouchers. In your plan, there's none of that. The same bookkeeping a school would do to just take tuition, they're going to take. The same bookkeeping the parents do to do their taxes or do their regular budget, they're going to do. That nothing changes. There's no additional, administrative cost on either end. And that's what I think with the Republican plan is going to drive up the cost for the recipient schools, because they now have a whole new layer of administration and compliance they have to attend to that they didn't attend to before, which of course is going to give the advantage to the bigger, better funded private schools with lots of backing, and those micro schools you talk about in order to compete potentially with the schools that can't afford a full-time accountant and can't afford compliance teams and so on, are going to struggle more. They won't be able to grow as fast and so on. So your plan allows the most free competition. So not just a true free market, but real competition, no winners, no losers. If somebody, wants to hire a separate bookkeeper, they can, but they don't need to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something that a lot of people don't think through the elements of regulatory capture and compliance and how those are pervasive in every single industry that's there. I was reading something that said of all of the healthcare spending in the United States, between 30 to 40% of that is administration.
Yes.
30 to 40%.
And we still have rampant fraud.
we still have rampant fraud. Like you know, if administration costs was like 5% and it saved 20% on the cost,
Yep.
maybe it's worth doing. But here in a situation,
seriously.
like we have these massive bloats and administrative costs, not just, I mean, it's in healthcare, it's in education, it's in insurance, it's in installing just about like,
and it's non-productive. So, you know, there might be somebody out there going, well, my cousin is an administrator in compliance or whatever. And it's like, okay, super. I'm happy they have a job. But you know what? They could take those skills and they could do something productive. I mean, in other words, the same skills that they're using in that department would be put to better use, and there would likely be a job for them in an economy that produced things.
Yes.
And produce services that people actually need and want, and aren't just servicing the government.
Yep. 100%. That's the one argument that I usually hear from the left. You know, because I'm a libertarian. I agree with the left on some things, disagree with the left on some things, agree with the right on some things, disagree with the right on some things. I usually get it from the left, where they look at it and they say, oh, well, look how many jobs this created. Right? This is government creating jobs.
No.
And you know, the funny thing is, that is actually a valid argument. It is government creating jobs, but that's where like a little more economics education might have been helpful. If a job is a net loser, right? If it is not creating something of value and is draining resources, all jobs are not good, right? There are some jobs that maybe shouldn't exist, and to create it just to create a job is ultimately, if you believe in the Austrian School of Economics, which, you know, I've very thoroughly studied the Chicago School, the Keynesian School, the Austrian School. Like that's my wheelhouse. And I truly believe the Austrian School is right here. You know, you have to look at it in the end of real economic productivity is what matters. And the only way that you will create a system that has the proper incentives to make that work is a truly free market. You have to have that free market. And if in that free market, a school is now big enough that it wants and needs an accountant, or that accountant is going to provide value and time savings or cost saving, great, give them a job. But to create this whole line of thing that says, hey, now every single school is going to need to pay somebody $50,000 a year just to fill out all of this paperwork. What is that doing? That's taking $50,000 from that school that could have been used to buy all the kids new laptops or buy new books or provide, like, do something that
wouldn't they rather hire a special needs reading teacher or something like that, you know? And that's what, you know, every time I hear these schools are underfunded and then I look at the administrative bloat, I want to scream. Because I'm like, underfunded in what way? Or are they just misallocating funds? Because
100%.
even the public school system, and I guess that would be, it's not really on the school choice thing, but as you are running for governor, why don't we ask you what the libertarian approach? You wouldn't be in charge of the Department of Public Instruction, but what would you hope as a libertarian, the person who would be in charge of that would start looking at in terms of if the public system is going to continue to exist and you're, you know, empowered to have any kind of oversight of it, what would you want as a finance person to see them put into place in that regard?
Yeah. So this, you know, as a gubernatorial candidate, I'm looking at kind of the issues in North Carolina, and education is one that I put a lot of thought into. Surprisingly, it wasn't in the newest one. It didn't make the top 3 issues that voters care about. I still have a plank there, but someone explained to me through this process. And again, I didn't dig super deep into the federal, but the idea behind the Department of Education, like the idea behind it, where it was supposed to be, hey, we've got all these states that are doing things, kind of have it be like a best practices sort of thing. Like if we still have to have a state Department of Education, which again, I think the real solution is if the government's just doing this financial transaction of essentially wealth redistribution, even if we want to use the most socialist charged language for this, because I came up front and said, yeah, this is socialism. I get it. And until we change the Constitution, we have to. But
at least you're admitting it. The Republicans are saying it's free market. We're going to collect all the taxes and then hand some of it back to you. It's a free market solution. I'm like, you're lying. Stop.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to create a free market within the socialist, the socialist system that exists.
Right. The most free one you can, right?
Yeah, competition, all of these things that should be good. But I'd love to see if that's the direction we went, where it's like, hey, this particular micro school somehow managed to like blow all these scores out of the water that like parents cared about. And they had some new method. Like if it was there where it was essentially just a resource, I could see that there. But I truly want, any elected position, I do not want elected people. I don't want politics in any way, shape, or form involved in education. That's not the job of politics. The goal of government, as you kind of start, it should be to defend and protect our liberties. Right. Nothing more, nothing less. So I'd love to see
conflict of interest to have them involved in education. Us, vote for us.
Yeah, I mean that was one of my one of my big issues where I've done some forward party events. There's some forward party members who support me. That was one of my big problems with UBI, right? Where it's that same idea, because essentially it's almost my education plan. This is almost UBI for education, right? But the problem with UBI, just as an idea, because the idea of it, if you care about people, we can take care of people. If you have government fulfilling this role and you somehow manage to get UBI implemented in the United States, every single election from that day forward will be nothing more than who's going to give you more UBI. That's right. They will run on a single platform. You get to this situation where the government's sending you a check for, $2,000 a month. Every single American. Here's $2,000 a month, right? $24,000 a year. You get that. Every single election is going to come down. Oh, he's only giving you 2,000. I want to give you 3,000. And you know what? People who know less about politics or don't care enough, they look at it and say, well, this guy is going to give me 50% more money, so I'm going to vote for them. Know nothing else about it. So until you can get the government out of that,
welcome
the best
to
thing
California
to do is take their control away. Yeah. Or okay, if you're going to be in the wealth redistribution business, I'm going to resist it. I'm going to say it's bad. I don't want that. But if you're going to do it, you can't attach strings to it. You can't get involved where you not only have the financial control, but the ideological control of whatever it is, whether it's education, whether it's anything that the government's trying to do. I want them to truly lose all of their power, especially the higher level up, right? If a small community, right? If there's like a small county that 100% wants, super woke schools. That's kind of if that's what their community wants, I don't want someone in Raleigh to shut that down.
Right.
I know that there's some people who may live there who are like, oh, I don't want them teaching these kids this. Great. Well, if my plan's been implemented, don't send your kid there. You have the full choice to not send your kid there.
Exactly.
Maybe worry about your life less.
Well, it's like I said, I didn't send my kids to Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools because I didn't want them to go there. So I stayed home and they stayed home. And, that meant we didn't, I put my career on hold for 12 years and, I had to put them back in school because of divorce and situation. But for at least the formative, those early years of elementary school, they learn to read and all that. But that was the choice that I made. I didn't get the money for it. I just said, I don't want my kids in that school, so I'm not going to send them to that school. Yeah. And that is a form of school choice. It's not government funded school choice. And that's what I really wish we could reframe the term, because even when the Republicans call it school choice, I don't think it's the correct name. I think it's government school expansion. I think
it's great marketing, though.
Yeah, it is great. Well, it's marketing. Like Black Lives Matter, because if you say I'm against it, like, how could you be against school choice? You're like, well, obviously I'm not against parental choice and parental rights and education freedom. I'm against school choice trademark, But your plan, I think, more accurately would be called school choice, because what you're saying is school dollars go in a pot. School dollars go back to everybody equally without us having any say in it beyond that. Go nuts. And now you really do have a choice of how to educate your kids with this one, same. And like I said, it's the most egalitarian because you're just dividing it equally. You're literally dividing it equally. Child equals dollars, not child in zip code. child with, this, da, 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 da. No, it's just child, gets money in North Carolina. This is how much. Beyond that, we're not telling you what to do with it. And I think what's great about your plan is that it forces conversations about these issues. So I'm really grateful that you came and talked to me about it.
Yeah.
I hope a lot of people will see this because to your point, this way they can say, well, hey, Corey DeAngelis and Cato and all these other places that are pushing, the other kind, Republicans and so on. Why wouldn't you do a plan like Mike Ross? What's wrong with just distributing it? And very quickly, you'll start to hear them say, well, we need this government, that government, the other government thing. And I think that's what I hope happens, audience, is that you ask these questions, you ask why they don't do a plan like Mike's, and then you listen to the answers and you ask yourself, is that what I would expect from the so-called party of limited government? Is that conservative? Is that in keeping with individual liberty and choice? Or is that just a way to hopefully build? And actually, Corey was honest about this at one point. He was asked, aren't you worried about strings? And he said, well, we've got to build a political coalition. This is going to help us build a political coalition, as if every recipient of these vouchers was a Republican. So the people who, undoubtedly are not in his political coalition who are going to get the dollars are not interested in being part of his political coalition. They're going to take the dollars to Bill and Melinda Gates School of the Better Tomorrow or whatever, and they're going to take their political coalition right back to the people who voted against his thing. And yours wouldn't do that. There'd be no reason to. There'd be no reason to.
Build a coalition around a better plan, if nothing else, right? Like you could build a coalition around anything. But the idea, and that was something where, if given the choice, like school choice sounds good at first glance, right? And some of the things that were there, and it kind of played a big role in the shaping of my education plan. It's like, how do I take all of the things that school choice claims to be or claims to do, and how do we actually make it something that will not give more power to the government, will not screw up the other choices, the other choices that existed. And that's kind of how we came about, because school choice had the marketing. I don't see them doing it much anymore. But I liked the marketing, and I was actually really bummed that they started using it, because if it wasn't there, I was going to actually use it for my plan.
Yeah.
Because I think that my plan much more accurately represents the idea of students, not systems.
Yes.
Far better than what, like, for school choice to say students, not systems.
I'm like, you're lying. Literally.
They say that students, not systems. It's not. It's not. Just an alternative system within the same system. You're still funding the system. Truly fund students. That was what the goal was in coming up with the plan. And I was just bummed that the GOP took that hashtag, because I didn't even know they took the hashtag. I was like, why don't we just call it, students instead of systems? And someone's like, oh, someone already took that hashtag. So I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not gonna take it, if the GOP is using it, but I will happily point out that their school choice plan is not funding students independent of systems. It's just funding other systems, and my plan actually would fund students, not systems.
Well, and it's growing the bureaucracy, the educational monopoly. It's extending it. I think the description of a Trojan horse is 100% accurate, because people say, well, it's not intended. I don't think intention has anything to do with it. Structurally, it is a Trojan horse. Structurally, it brings the government into the private system. And there's no argument you can make that makes any sense or holds any water that refutes that. It absolutely does do that. And that's in every state, every bill I've looked at. There's not a bill out there that doesn't do that. So by that definition, it is a Trojan horse, because once on the inside, now you're going to have both schools and parents who need that money. Yep. Once you get people in a position of dependency like that, now you can grow it, turn it, change it. Elections come along. You can do whatever you want. The horse is inside the gates, and you're not going to be able to kick it out without suffering some kind of pain. And one thing that I worry about as a homeschooling parent is that you'll have some of these, let's say mom and pop, curriculum developers, small schools have been operating, serving homeschoolers for decades online and other places. And they've been able to hire, like 6 teachers. We all have PhDs. We do our thing. We have our website and, it's all great. Parents will come to them now with their shiny new voucher. And these are online, so they maybe service the whole country. I want to come to your school with my shiny new voucher. And they're going to have to sit there and say, do we say no? Or do we say yes and run the risk that when we say yes and they start coming and, oh, we noticed that you have, 10 new students are doing this. You're going to need to do this, 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 and this. And then we have to tell our students, you got to leave.
Yeah.
We can't have you be our students. Meanwhile, they've displaced other students that might have come with their own money. And so this is, schools out there right now are having to schools and providers are having to decide, do we take the money or do we not take the money? And I've talked to some who say, well, we're going to go ahead and take the money provisionally. And then if the strings come, we're going to start turning it down. And while I respect the fact that they're trying to at least parse it, I think that's going to be tough to do. I think when the time comes that they feel under pressure, it's going to be a really tough thing to do to suddenly say, I'm sorry, you can no longer come to our school unless you pay out of pocket because we're not taking the government money anymore. I don't think it's going to be as easy a decision as they think.
I agree 100%.
That's speculation. 100%. I can't prove that. It's just one of those things. I think it's going to be hard.
It's logically consistent and it is in line with true economic principles, right? If you create, especially if they try to sequester it for a while, but as that piece of the pie grows, where, let's say it's 100% privately funded now, doesn't get a penny. Maybe they get to the point where, hey, 25% of our revenue is coming from these vouchers now. Okay, we could maybe walk away from, that. We're okay in this situation. Now you find yourself where it flips. Now 75% of your revenue is coming from this system. I don't care how ideologically pure you try to be. The economic pressure of that, if you have not adequately prepared for it, will destroy the school.
That's right. And it will, you also run the risk that you very quickly get to 25% or 50% because so many people are rushing in to want to buy what you're selling using these dollars.
100%.
And I don't know how, if it comes to like where the parents go, okay, I'll use this money for something else and use my own dollars for this school, then you run the risk that the government's going to come in and go, oh, I see what you're doing here. You're using this ESA account to fund this other thing so that you can use your own dollars for private school. And I have no doubt at some point they're going to come in with more and more regulations, with more paperwork that has to be done to trace the dollar. Because when they say we're going to fund students, where the dollars are going to follow the student, I think they mean it literally. Like, I think they want to follow that dollar right into the classroom, wherever it is. Okay. And I can't prove it again, but I just think that if you give the government the opportunity to do it, you're playing with fire.
Yeah, they always seem to want more power, never seem to want to give it up. And
no, for sure.
There's certainly every school choice bill that I've looked at, they all do give the government more power, whether you like them or not. If you are arguing in good faith, I don't think that there is a good faith argument that any school choice is not giving the government more power. Now, some people, or there's a lot of very statist Republicans who, just own it and, say, hey, okay, I like the program. And I don't care that it's giving them more power, but I know that there are a lot of conservatives who generally, align with the Republican Party more so, that truly don't want to give the government more power.
That's right.
So at least be honest. Your school choice is giving the government more power.
That's all I'm asking. All right.
So
Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think I hope, like I said, I hope this sparks many a conversation. Audience, thank you for coming. I know we didn't look at too many of your comments. There weren't a lot of questions per se. But you can certainly send me your questions after the show. If you're watching in the replay, thank you so much. Please have these conversations, ask tough questions when people are selling you on school choice. And like I said, try it out. Even if you're not in North Carolina, say, you know what? I saw this candidate and he has this plan. Why can't we have that plan? And see what they say, because I think the answers will be very instructive. And of course, if you are watching in North Carolina, pretty please seriously consider your vote this November, because we do have an actual choice this go around. And I would very much like to see us fire the uniparty. That's as political as I get on this channel. I don't usually get political, but I'm going to go ahead right now. And I'm going to endorse Mike Ross for governor of North Carolina, because I think your plan, education is my top issue. And I think your plan makes a lot of sense. And I greatly appreciate your honesty saying that it is a socialist plan, because we have to call a thing what it is. And we're not going to be able to move away from redistributive, I can't say that word, policies until we call them out as being, that. And there's no point in lying about it. So thank you. I appreciate that. That's gutsy. And I guess that's about it. Any final words?
Yeah, I mean, if you'll give me just a final moment there,
Please.
Deb. This November, if you're in North Carolina, I'm a regular guy. I am a libertarian. I hope you'll see that I'm not a politician. I'm going to tell you the truth. Please consider voting for me. And in line with that, since we have two homeschoolers here, a few years ago, I was deathly afraid to homeschool my kid. It has been the best decision of my life. Between technology, you have the ultimate choice. It may require shifting some things around in your life, but you have the ultimate school choice now. You can get the government out of education. There are great groups, great communities out there. Look into it if you're thinking about it. If you can dedicate, 4 hours to your child for education, between whoever the adults or teachers in your house are going to be, you can do it. Don't be afraid. Look into it, because you can get your kids away from government education today. You just may have to make some sacrifices. And I promise you, that's a much easier path than helping me try to fire the uniparty. And that's something you can get today, regardless of how that election goes.
Absolutely. And I've been telling people that for 3 years. I'm like, you have choice now. You can do it. Thank you for adding that. I greatly appreciate that. I'm a big homeschooling evangelist. So yeah. And if anyone watching is in North Carolina, or actually even if you're not, because I operate virtually, I do offer private tutoring and homeschool classes customized. If anyone is out there looking for somebody to teach their kids, I can help you out. So get in touch with me and I'd be happy to help you, whether you need some consulting to do it on your own and figure out what your curriculum should be, or you actually want to hire me to teach your kid English and writing or history or whatever. I can do that. So that's about it. But thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful to everyone, and you especially, Mike. And that's it. I guess we'll see you next time. Take it easy, everybody.
Thanks so much.